Trump made a loud demand to bring steel production back full force, but Carney wasn't having it. With one sharp move, he blocked the deal and walked away, and almost instantly, Detroit's auto would start shaking. Plants froze, workers panicked, and insiders say one major company might shut its doors tonight. Why did Carney take such a bold step? And can Detroit really handle the fallout if things get worse by morning? Sources say this clash could turn into the biggest trade standoff the country has seen in years. This isn't just about steel, it's about power, and the cracks are already forming.
We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs. Not really a negotiation.
The clock kept ticking as August 1st, 2025 came closer. The United States and Canada were running out of time to settle a new trade agreement. It was being called a soft deadline, but the situation was growing serious by the hour. Talks weren't going well. President Donald Trump, speaking loudly as usual, didn't sound hopeful. He said that maybe there wouldn't be a deal with Canada at all. "We haven't had much luck with Canada," he said, before adding that Canada might just have to pay high tariffs instead of making any deal. It wasn't a negotiation, he claimed. It was a warning. On the other side, Canada wasn't rushing either. Canadian leaders made one thing very clear. They would only accept the best deal for Canada. And if it didn't benefit them, they were ready to walk away. Detroit had been through some hard times before: economic crashes, job losses, even factory closures. But this time, it was different. It happened suddenly and with no warning. Steel from Canada, which was once the heart of Detroit's industry, stopped arriving. Trains that usually brought steel showed up empty. Big warehouses stayed dark. Assembly lines and car factories came to a halt. It was like someone had turned off the city's power switch. And by early July 2025, most steel from Canada had just stopped crossing the border. Prices of the remaining supply shot up. It became 3 times more expensive. Factories couldn't afford the steel, and some even shut down. Construction projects froze. Detroit, once the symbol of American industry, stood still.
Looking for the best deal for Canada, we're only going to accept the best deal.
And just across the river, it was a whole different world in Hamilton, Ontario. The mills were louder than ever. Canadian steel towns like Hamilton, Windsor, and Sault Ste. Marie saw something they hadn't seen in years. Parking lots were full. Workers who had been jobless for years were suddenly called back. Furnace fires burned brightly yet again. No press conference, no shouting. Canada just quietly shifted gears. Instead of fighting back with tariffs like Trump, Canada focused inward. They kept their steel at home, using it to build their own projects and expand clean energy. Detroit was left stunned, asking, why did Canada do this, and what happens now? Car factories in cities like Flint, Dearborn, and Detroit were hit the hardest. Without Canadian steel, everything became more expensive. Ford alone lost over $2.5 billion in the first 6 months of 2025. The cost of raw materials jumped between 6% and 9%. Trucks, SUVs, and other large vehicles were suddenly much harder to make. Companies had to cut back shifts. Some production lines were completely shut down. And all this chaos came from one move made by Trump in June of 2025. Trump used a special law called Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. It meant to protect the country during times of national threat. Using this, Trump slapped a 50% tariff on all steel and aluminum from Canada. It was one of the biggest trade hits in modern history. Canada, despite being the US's biggest supplier and close ally, was given no special treatment. They were expected to pay the full price like everybody else. But instead of getting angry in public, Canada made a smart plan in private.
Down that road, I wouldn't recommend the president going down that road, because every tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans.
Canada didn't shout. They didn't fight back with loud speeches or matching tariffs. They changed their own rules quietly. They updated how steel could be sold in the country. Environmental rules were made stricter. New safety standards were introduced. Officially, American steel wasn't banned, but it suddenly didn't meet the new standards. US steel companies found they could no longer win contracts. They couldn't meet the rules. Slowly, orders stopped coming. Factories in the US suffered, while Canadian steel was used at home. Canada had already started preparing even before Trump made his announcement. In early 2025, the Canadian government launched a $1 billion program to improve the steel industry. They didn't just want to survive a trade war, they wanted to become stronger and cleaner. Old factories were upgraded to use less carbon. Canada focused on steel made using clean energy. They also set new standards for things like defense and energy projects. It was all part of a bigger plan. Canada also cut down on how much steel it would accept from other countries. They didn't want cheap steel flooding in from Asia or elsewhere. If a company tried to send in too much, they were hit with big penalties. This helped Canadian steel prices stay steady. It gave local companies the confidence to spend money and grow. Construction projects were now using steel made in Canada by Canadians. And Canada didn't just stop at its factories. They also changed rules for big public projects like subways, bridges, and even warships. Any company that wanted to work on these projects had to prove their steel was clean and made in Canada. This move kept money inside the country. It helped the environment and gave Canadian steel an advantage without breaking international trade rules.
Imports.
We still continue to believe that it would be a mistake for the American government to proceed with imposing tariffs. It would be a mistake.
In America, things kept getting worse. Builders couldn't afford materials. Projects were delayed or canceled. State budgets got stretched thin. Contractors walked away. But Washington couldn't do much. Canada hadn't done anything illegal. They had just become smarter, and there was no rulebook to stop that. Canada started using new machines called electric arc furnaces. These machines use electricity instead of coal. They release less pollution and work better with clean energy sources like hydropower. Ontario and Quebec already had strong electric grids thanks to their rivers. This made it easy for them to support clean steel production. Canada's clean steel caught the attention of buyers around the world. In Europe, rules were changing. Countries were planning to tax dirty steel. But Canada's clean steel didn't face those taxes. America's steel, made with coal and other fossil fuels, suddenly looked less attractive. Buyers turned to Canada. Canada also changed the way it handled scrap steel. Instead of throwing it all away, they turned it into something valuable. Companies that used recycled steel got a 35% tax rebate. Towns improved recycling programs. Factories built systems to reuse old steel. This made steel cheaper and cleaner. It also protected Canada from price jumps around the world. In the US, politicians pointed fingers. They said Canada was to blame for everything, from factory closures to job losses. But they didn't offer real solutions. There was no big plan like Canada's. America stayed stuck while Canada kept moving forward. Canada didn't just treat steel as metal anymore. It became a symbol of smart planning. The government even started giving out carbon passports for steel. These papers proved that the steel was made cleanly and safely. This helped Canadian steel get into European markets easily. Other countries now saw Canadian steel as a premium product worth more because it was clean and trusted. At home, Canadian companies learned that if they followed the clean rules, they would get the best contracts. It was no longer just about making steel, it was about being part of a bigger mission. In the US, things were falling behind. Prices were going up. Buyers were worried about the carbon footprint of American steel. Meanwhile, Canada was forming partnerships, getting contracts, and building a new reputation. This was no longer just a trade fight. It was a choice between two different paths. Trump used tariffs, walls, and pressure. Canada used planning, clean energy, and quiet changes in law. And when Europe shut its doors to dirty steel, Canada didn't knock. It walked right in with clean, strong, trusted steel made from hydropower and a modern system. Canada didn't win by shouting. It won by thinking ahead. Detroit suffered overnight, but the roots of this shift had been growing for years. While the US looked outward, Canada looked inward and came out stronger than ever. Thanks for watching, and if this shocked you, hit that like button, tap subscribe, and ring the bell so nothing wild slips past. Catch you in the next one!